For the folks who don't know me, are we recording? Okay, for the folks who don't know me, I'm Dan Hendry. I have been in the ornamental turning since '07. Little story to go along with that. In '07, there was an article in the American Association, in the AAW Journal, showing about this wonderful thing about an MDF lathe. There was one article how to build it and one article how to operate it. Well, I read both those articles 2 or 3 times, and I'll be danged if I could figure out how that thing worked. I worked on airplanes for 40 years, and I thought it was kind of mechanically inclined, but it just went right over the top. Well, I went to Portland, Oregon, to the AAW symposium that year, and John McGill, the author of the articles, he had 2 demonstrations, one how to build it and one how to operate it. And how to build it was very interesting. But he turned that thing on and the chips started flying, and I said, oh my goodness, now I know how it works. We had drove out there, and I thought about that all the way home, and I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I made up my mind I was going to do it. Well, I made an MDF lathe, and I used it for a couple, 3 years, and then I had an opportunity to buy a Lindau White machine, and I bought that, and it's been upgraded numerous times. This is not a Lindau White. This is a lathe that was built by Martin Strand. It's owned by Sammy Thompson. Thank you very much, Sammy, for letting me use it, because mine it's movable, but it's an effort to do it. It's just very, very heavy and awkward, and you have to do some disassembly and put it back together. This is portable, and it does 95% of what mine will do. There's a couple odd things that mine will do that this one won't. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about the history of ornamental turning, some of the different lathes that are available, and the parts of the rose engine lathe, or the ornamental lathe. Rose engine lathe is actually a part of an ornamental turning family. Rose engine is called a rose engine because it has the white thing at the end there. Can you see that? That's called a rosette, and hence the rose engine. A lathe that turns on a shaft is an engine lathe, like a machinist lathe, so that's where you come up with a rose engine. This turning of lathes, ornamental turning, has been around since about the 1500s. There was some old lathes built, and I don't know exactly what they were in that time frame, but there was a guy named Hosaffel that built some lathes in England. He was a German that moved to England many, many years ago in the late 1800s, early 1900s. His company built over 2,400 lathes, and they said there was not any of them alike. In fact, you couldn't hardly take a screw from one machine to the other because everything was hand built. There was no such a thing as any kind of automation to do that. I'm not sure what kind of tooling you'd use in the late 1800s, 1900s to build something that works precision. It would have been a real feat. Now, I guess they had files. I really don't know what they did, but it would be something to happen. Anyhow, he built several of them, and there was some other folks that built some lathes. There was a Evans, a Field, a Plant, a Lauer, and a Clare. And they're all old, and the people using ornamental lathes or rose engine lathes almost died out because there was nothing new a person could buy. If you want to do some ornamental turning, you had to go find one of these old wore-out lathes and repair it, bring it up to standard, and teach yourself how to operate it, because there was very few people in the world doing it. Right now, we guess there's between 450 people in the world that's into ornamental turning. That's not a whole lot of people. There is a club organization called Ornamental Turning of International, and I think it has a membership of around 200 or 250 people, and that's worldwide. That's not necessarily just the United States, but most of the people are in the United States. But what got this restarted again is the MDF lathe. That was a fairly inexpensive way to get started. When I got going with mine, I figured I had about $1,000 in it. Time I bought the metal parts and the cross table and the cutters and everything to make it work. So it wasn't inexpensive, but it wasn't $100,000 like you can spend today if you wanted to. I'm also going to do a little demo and show you how it actually works. I've got some pictures. Could you go to the computer? Okay, the top one is a picture of a Lindau White machine in its pretty basic form. I don't know how to get down to the one below it is a a made lathe, and it's made by the same guy who built the Lindau White machine, and it stands for the 4 people who went together, the first initial of their names, and it is a very nice lathe. It does some things that the Lindau White machine will not do, but it doesn't do all that great, but it's in the neighborhood of $100,000. It's mostly brass and a lot of pretty mahogany in it. It's something you could almost put in your living room because it's very, very pretty. Let's see if I can go to the next one here. Okay, this here is a lathe. This is one of the hose apple lathes, and it's basic, but it still does a lot of things. If you can see there in the center, there's a whole bunch of discs, the brass things. Those are brass discs, and they're all in different shapes. So you move your rubber to the whatever shape you want to make at that particular time. And below this is some of the accessories that goes with it. Come on here. Well, I don't want to advance. Let me see if I can. I got a couple other pictures I wanted to show. This here is a picture of my of the MDF lathe that I built in '07. And this is a picture of my Lindau White machine at home. Okay, go back to the camera. What I want to do is talk about the different parts of the lathe. They're shaped differently and maybe look a little bit differently, but they're the same basic pieces. There is a headstock, just like you have on your lathe at home, and it's this piece from here to here that has the shaft on it. It's threaded, and at the other end it holds a rosette. The indexing plate, a lot of my lathe at home, this here big plate has holes in it. It's precisionally located in equal numbers, so I can move it to a different location to make a cut. I can also use the rosette down here to do the same thing, and I will do that in a little while. It has a hand crank. This in here is disconnected because the motor is there. It has a slow speed drive. This here is a slow speed drive. This is a real high dollar one. It's a barbecue motor, but it works. The rosette is this white piece down at the end. Get the overhead shot. There it is. The rosettes can be made in numerous different configurations. I have got 40 of them at home. This one here, I call it a 24 bump because there's 24 of these little peaks and 24 valleys. And they can be in numerous shapes, and there's some oddities that happens in different cuts, and I'll show you that in a little bit. The rubbers, this here is the rubber, this here thing with the bearing. The rubbers come in different varieties, different shapes. This is the flat one, so when it just goes from bump to bump, it doesn't go down into the valley. This one here has got a larger radius. This is a smaller radius. They all make, when you change the rubber, it changes your final cut a little bit. You wouldn't think it would, but it does. The cutting frame. This is a cutting frame. It's called a universal cutting frame. And the reason it's called a universal cutting frame is this little set screw right here, you can loosen that and you can rotate this head anywhere between 90 straighten up or 90 laying on the side or anywhere in between. And it changes your cut again. This here is a tool post. The tool post is used to connect the cutter to the compound table. This is a compound table. It precisionally moves this way and this way. And when you're doing this kind of work, you're working in thousandths of an inch rather than 16ths and 32nds and things of that nature. And it's amazing, just a few thousandths of an inch makes all the difference in the world. A fly cutter. This is a fly cutter. Give me an overhead shot. This here is a solid carbide cutter, and it'll be spinning probably about 8,000 RPM, and it's very sharp, and it makes a very, very neat cut. All of the cutters, even this here, there's a little triangle-shaped solid carbide cutter, and each point is a different cutting tip. So you can, when the tip gets dull, you take a little screw out and you rotate it, however many degrees that would be, and you got a new cut until you get all the way around. The overhead drive. This orange belting and this motor down here is your overhead drive that drives the cutter through this belt. This is urethane belting. You get it in a roll and you heat it and you put it together and you grind the bump off of it. So if you've got a good weld job, it'll stay together. If you don't, it'll come apart. Ask me how I know. Okay, there's several other accessories that you can use on the ornamental turning lathes or rose engine lathes as a threading jig. This little piece right here has threads that's cut into the wood. And they're cut very precisionally, and you put a bobbin on there, and it moves the shaft in and out as your cutter is going around, and makes very nice threads. This is made out of myrtle wood, and what I did is before I cut the threads, I soaked this with thin super glue where the threads was going to be cut, let it dry good, cut my threads, and then before I changed anything, I drizzled another layer of super glue and ran the cutter back around it, and it made that softer wood. Myrtle wood is not very hard, and it makes a pretty good thread. I want to keep this piece because it's got some other pieces on it, other designs. There's some straight line jig where you've seen a pocket watch. It had kind of a zigzag pattern put into it. Well, the Lindau White machine, you can make that machine go up and down, and with a pattern bar, and you could make those zigzags very, very precisionally. But you're only cutting maybe 3 or 4 thousandths deep, and you're scratching it. You've got a solid carbide cutter that's scratching that design into the metal. But it's done very precisionally, and it's one of them things that you have to have your machine precisionally lined up. It can't be off at all. It's got to be exactly. And there's other things that you can make it a pumping action, and there's a thing called a curvilinear, which I have built one, but I didn't bring it tonight. But it allows me to make a piece like this. It's got a curve on the side. Also, and then I've got an oval rosette that cuts the oval pattern. You're making two designs at the same time, and it's very time consuming to do that. Okay, I'm going to, some of the different cuts you could do with the same rosette is called phasing. What you do is you change the relationship of the wood to the rosette so that now you cut one row and you've got your peaks and valleys, and now you change it 50%, and now your peaks and valleys are not lined up anymore. The peak on this one's lined up with the valley with this one. And it's just a matter of changing this over here. And I'm going to do that in a little bit. Okay, there's an oddity in this here business. When you cut on one side of the piece, it gives you a rounded edge on it. You cut on the other side, it gives you a pointed edge using the same rosette. See the rounded curves on the top, on the outside edge? And now it's pointed, and it's done with the same rosette. I'll pass that around. I've got 2 or 3 of them here, different patterns. It's one of them things you say, well, why does it do that? There's something to do with geometry, I guess. There's a couple people that's made this here ornamental turning brought it back to life, I guess you would say. John McGill, who come up with the MDF lathe, and Steve White and David Lindau. Steve White and David Lindau got together and designed the Lindau White machine after some older lathes. It's not an exact copy, but it's used some of the old principles. And it actually works, and it's what they put enough thought into it. It's become very, they've added a lot more features to it to make it do different things. It's a very nice lathe. Okay, what I want to do is one other thing. There's a guy named John Armbruster. If you're interested in ornamental turning at all, he is a ophthalmologist. I believe that's the right term, an eye doctor, and he lives up in Maine. And he has, I guess, a extremely nice shop. And he built some Mark 8 lathes, or rose engine lathes. I think he built 24 of them, and they sold for $36,000 probably 8, 9 years ago. And if you ever hear of an Armbruster lathe for sale, I'd say it's just 99% as good as the made lathe. Now, how much it would cost, I have no idea. But some of these older lathes are worth a lot of money if they've been restored. But if they haven't been restored, you're going to have to be a pretty good machinist to do that. And working with an ornamental rose engine lathe, ornamental lathe, it's working like a metal machinist would do with a precision that you don't normally see in woodworking. And say just a few thousandths of an inch, it makes all the difference in the world. Okay, I'm going to cut a design on this. I got a piece of plywood here. Is that lined up so you can see the cutter? I get a piece of plywood and I dyed it a dark color so that when the pattern starts emerging, it'll show more. The tailstock camera. This is going to be a little bit noisy, so bear with me. Between the barbecue motor and the cutter. That cutter tip is moving probably 8 to 10,000 RPM, so it's making a lot of cuts in a short period of time. You can see the patterning emerging there at the bottom. And that's a 24 bump rosette, so there's 24 little cuts on there. Each revolution of this hand crank moves it this way 50 thousandths of an inch. 50 thousandths is less than way less than a 16th. And what I usually do is cut it twice after it's been, you hear the sound change, the cutter is not cutting anymore. I want to advance it about 3 thousandths of an inch, and that allows it to clean up the cut. Now, if I was in a good piece of hardwood like this here, blackwood, it would shine right off of the piece, right off the cutter. How do I know when I'm back to the beginning? You can almost hear and see that if you're looking at it really, really close, you can see the shavings coming off, and when it gets back to where you started, it'll quit, but the sound will change. So I'm back to where I was at. So I'll back it out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I moved it over 6 turns, so that'd be 300 thousandths of an inch. Can you hear it cutting? Yes.
When you're building one, you're making one of these yourself, how much tolerance is in the backlash that the quantity you tolerate?
Well, you can if you work it right, you can tolerate quite a bit, because if you take all your slack out going one way, you can feel where that's at, so you can start your measurement from that point. You can, these little dials on here, you can zero them out, so you could go back to where that there becomes where your cutter is engaged and make a 0 point, and so when you go back to that, you'd be back at 0 and it just start cutting. You can, but I'm here to tell you, I had a Chinese compound table when I first started this, and I thought I was really doing well until I used a hardage slide that doesn't have any slack in it, and I realized you need the better slide. Oh, about $2,000, and that's a refurbished one. Yeah. And if I want to change the direction of my cutter, I just turn the belt around. So now the cutter runs in the opposite direction. I want to make one more cut. Something's making that there cut. You can't hardly make it out. I'll pass this around in just a minute. Right, right. If I'd have read my dialer, I could go back to this actually the same depth on each cut, and that way it would have been exactly perfect. I didn't do that. If I was doing this, you tell the cut's over. Sometimes the brown or something like this here is layers of veneer. So you see the different layers of the veneer there? And when you cut down through the veneer, it makes a really pretty pattern. Depends on what colors of veneer you glue together. You have to be perfectly lined up, because threads is your worst enemy. My machine at home, it has a Morse taper on it, and it's very, very accurate, because I can go to my regular wood turning lathe, make my piece round, and bring it over here, and it's still lined up. When I had my MDF lathe, it did not have the Morse taper, and I bought what's called a leveling chuck. It goes between the headstock and the chuck, and you can line it up so it takes out the wobble this way, and you can go side by side, and you have to use a dial indicator so that when that thing goes around, you almost have zero run out. And it takes far longer to adjust that to get the zero run out than it does to make the cut. But if you don't, there's enough slop in the threads, it'll mess it up. They say back in the days when they performed Morse tapers that the machinist would actually take a mallet and tap on their piece till they finally got it centered to take the slop out of the threads. That takes skill to do that. Okay, what I want to do now is make a cut on the opposite side with a different cutter.
Can I ask a question, Dan?
You may.
So you've got this one here, and the LWM101. And on one side, you can see where that pattern comes from. You turn on the other side, and it looks kind of like squarish.
Yes.
Could you explain how that became squarish, whereas this one is sort of roundish?
No, I can't. You see this here. This here is the points are rounded. I'm going to show you a different cut. This here is a drill frame. I didn't explain that, and it's just a piece that rotates, and it's got a collet in it, just like your router does at home. And you get collets in different sizes to grip different sizes of bits. The rosettes. I won't say you can't, but they have to be made very, very precisionally, or you'll see it may not be perfectly round, or your bumps may be just a little bit off. Most of them these days are made on a CNC machine. This one here, a guy over in the Dallas Club has a CNC machine, and he made this for me because I did not have a 24 bump rosette that was made quite like this. I had some that had kind of a flower on the top, but not that depression like this here. And I like this one really well because it allows me to do a lot of different things with it. No, it's a drilling frame. It's just a shaft. It's got bearings. Huh? What do you mean off center? Well, with one I have at home, I use a great big old square to line everything up. And if it's something I'm doing really precision, I use a dial indicator so that I can get it set so that this table is exactly parallel with what I'm trying to do. If you're doing a large cylinder and you're trying to do something on the side of it and you're moving down, well, if this isn't lined up perfectly, your cuts are not going to be the same depth. I had it right first time. Okay. What I've got in here, this is a number 1 starting drill. And the cutting tip on it is 3/64. 3/64 is about 45 thousandths of an inch. That's not very much. It's what? Oh yeah. Well, it's one of these things you got to be a little bit cautious with. That light's not. Is that light bothering you? Is that make it a glare? Well, just a minute and I'll get it lined up and I'll turn the light off.
What's the size of the collet in that?
1/8 inch. 1/8 inch. I've got a set of collets at home that go all the way from 1/8 inch up to 3/8 of an inch. So you can change them out to whatever collet size whatever you got going.
What were those drill frames used on?
Well, you can do many things with it.
What were they came from before they went on to those layers?
This here was a piece of round bar. Didn't have nothing in it. Fred Groves made this for me. I went to the bearing store and bought 2 nice bearings, and I bought a shaft, and we made it work. Okay. A drilling frame, they can be many different shapes, but it's primarily you got a shaft. It's like a drill. And you can put solid carbides or high-speed steel or whatever kind of cutter you got. This fly cutter also will go, I'm going to use this in a little bit. This fly cutter goes into the same drill frame. And it's a 5/16 collet that goes in there. And a collet is good because it grips all the way around so that you don't have, it doesn't wobble on you. A collet is very, very true. Okay, forget where I'm at here. Okay, here we go. Do the tailstock. Here, see the pattern? And I'm cutting on the opposite side of center. And I didn't change the rosette or anything. You can buy these drills in many different shapes and profiles, and you can also use them on you can get a universal frame cutter that has a solid carbide single cutter that you can do into different profiles to make different designs. This here is a finger saver. It's a high-dollar brush. It was a painter's brush that's got short bristles on it, but it knocks the dust off so you can see what's going on, and you don't get your fingers in the cutter. Okay, I'm done with this. Now, if this was a piece of Hardwood, it would be, the cut would be very, very smooth, but it's not. It's just I wanted the cut to jump out at you. Inch 8, yes. That's pretty common in all the lathes of this size.
You said your lathe has a number 2 Morse taper in it?
Yes, but I have adapters that fit that has a Morse taper cut on it and a thread. So you put your chuck or your faceplate on it, tighten it down, put a set screw onto it so it don't come loose, and you go turn your piece on your lathe. Now it's round, but it may not be perfectly round in relation to the lathe, to the chuck, but it's round in relation to the Morse taper. So you bring the Morse taper to the ornamental lathe, you put it in there, and it's centered. You don't have to worry about all this adjustment. This will take a couple minutes here, so don't go away.
Every single one of your rosettes?
No. I'm not going to lie to you. I have not.
Plan to?
Maybe someday before I die. I don't know.
Is that your drill frame?
Yes, it is. The cutters are mine. This here is this is a Lindau cutter right here. Yes, he also makes one where this cutter doesn't have the solid carbides. This here is just a round shaft with a hole drilled through it for a 3/16 or an 1/8 inch cutter. This is made out of solid carbide, so they could be shaped at different profiles. You can sharpen the carbide with diamond pretty easily, but you got to have diamond to do it. Where was I at here?
So nobody, you guys haven't made any of your own universal frames. You're using,
No, Martin has made some.
has he?
Yeah. I know some people on the internet said they're making their own rosettes, but I question how accurate they really are.
As accurate as the machinist.
That's true. As accurate as you how accurate you make them. But I tried to make some one time, and I could make it with a router bit. I could make the valleys, but I never could figure out how to make a rounded peak. I took a big router bit, like an 1.25 router bit, and I had a real nice valley using indexing, so I could get I got it perfectly centered all the way around, equal spaces, but I couldn't figure out how to make a rounded top. Nobody's. This was several years ago. I tried it, and nobody's given me an idea since then how you do it, other than a CNC machine. Well, then you'd end up with something like this right here. I could have made this right here, with the valley, with a peak. But some of them, as you see this passed around, some of them has got nice. They got nice rounded edges on them. It depends on what you want to do. You make it sound so easy. I don't think so. I won't say you can't. Okay, I'm going to use this here as an indexer so that I can move this one notch. And that becomes, I've got this is a 24 bump, so I can move it 24 different times. Now, I put my safety glasses on when I do this. And the reason being is, I had just got one of these here sharpened, and I thought I could just come along here and just set this up and let the machine go bump, 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 bump all the way around. It made about 2 bumps, and the tip of that cutter is somewhere in my shop, and I don't know where. And it could have been in my eyeball. So I think I'm going to wear safety glasses. If it's in my cheek, it would probably hurt, but I can fix that. But you can't fix your eyeballs. Anyhow, I wear safety glasses. Okay, what I'm going to do here is make a basket weave. I'm going to do one of these right here. And what this is you do one cut, and then you come along and you re-index so that the point is in the valley of the other cut. Oh, okay. There. I'm always going to do 2 of them, but this is what it's going to end up like. That's my goal. This piece here, I made this here, a new gadget to go on into my lathe. And I always wanted to be able to decorate an oval box, and this is an oval box. And I tried several different designs, and none of them come out right, but I tried the basket weave, and lo and behold, it looks pretty good. However, a machinist or another ornamental turning would look at that and say, well, this ain't quite as deep as this is over here. Well, it may not be, but it still looks pretty darn good, I think. It's close enough for my eye. This here is a barleycorn on the top. And that looks complicated, but it really isn't. You take this little gadget right here, and you set this cutter in relation to where it's cutting, to the size of the circle that you want to cut. And you put this in the drill frame, and it's spinning, and the point of that there makes those marks. It's really a very easy thing to do. It's just a matter of setting the diameter of your little circles. Okay. See if I can go. Yeah, I got it right. Okay. What I'm going to do is I want to cut all the way around. This over here is a stop, so that once I get the depth that I want, I'll set my stop so I can just simply crank it back to the stop and not have to worry about reading my numbers. Now, a true machinist thinks that's probably not the way to do it, but I'm not a true machinist. I try to do things it's somewhat easy. The motor is out of the picture. That's just really going to just move it a bump at a time, and this is truly indexing because my machine at home says it's got holes in it, and I got a pin I can put into it so I can count out however many holes go every 4th hole or every 5th hole or whatever I want to do to make an index, a cut. The rosette is become my index. Okay, cutter on. Does that help or hinder? Unfortunately, the cut is on my side. Okay, we're going to think that's the depth I want right there.
Just let the motor move it around, wouldn't go in and out?
Well, that's what I was doing when I broke the tip off of it. I guess somebody says you can do that. I broke the tip off of it and say, I don't have any idea where it's at. Never have found it. But it's spinning about 8,000 RPM, so it's got some good speed to it, so it ain't no telling where it's going to go. It could have been. But if you was going to do that, you'd have to make several passes to get the depth you want. You've heard the old adage, if you ask 5 wood turners how to do something, you'll get 6 answers. Well, this here is kind of the same thing. You can get a lot of opinions. Okay, we've cut.
You're gauging your depth by how many turns?
No, by this stop here.
Okay, so it does.
This stop, when I crank it in, I can feel it, the resistance, so I quit cranking. I could read the dial, but this has got a little slop in it, like he was talking about. So it's better to have a mechanical stop. I built this. This is something that don't come with it. I wanted something that I was clamping a little piece of metal onto my table, and I thought there's got to be a better way of doing this. So I thought about it and come up with this idea, and it works pretty good. Okay, now I got to phase it. And I don't know how to explain that other than I'm going to change the relationship between the rosette and the wood. Come on, fat fingers. Okay, now the cutter. There is off of my Lindoff White. There is some marks there, and I used that to drill me some holes into this plate. I've got a series of holes for 24 bump and 12 bump and 18 bump, and they're spaced apart so that there's 3 holes, and you go from the outside one to the middle one, and now you've moved it 50%, so that the peak is in the middle of the valley. Okay, now I got to move this over. This cutter is 1/8 of an inch, so I got to go over 125 thousandths. There's 50, 100, and 25. And that looks about right. Okay. Does the light help or? Huh? Can you? Is that good or bad?
Move the light so it gives you a
Is that better? I mean, I have a right to see too. Yeah, I know it. Okay, I'm all the way around. Now the beauty of this here is if I got one that doesn't look deep enough or whatever, I can change my depth stop and I can go all back around it until if I don't change the what's in the chuck in the relationship to the rosette. Once you change that, then different ball game. It's hard to get things back to where it was at. So you want to make sure you're where you're at before when you say you're done. Okay, that's basically what I was going to do. I hope I didn't confuse you or throw too many details out there that's hard to understand, because it took a while for this to soak in here, so it's hard to absorb it all at one time. You can take a simple piece, as you can see some of these here, and you can decorate them and come up with something that's really quite unique. This piece here, you ain't got the tailstock, have you? You got the overhead. No, you ain't. I'm seeing on the screen is the overhead. There we go. Okay, this piece right here, we had a workshop back in May. There was 4 Lindau White machines, and there was a dozen people there, and David Lindau and Peter Gertzel was there, and they were very, very. David's the one that built the machine, and he pretty much made this box with a little of my help on my machine, and probably there is 24 setups on here. Time we got the hex made and made all the designs inside and outside, and made these little designs here. It takes a setup for each one of those little pieces, and it took a while. It took all day to do it. So I believe it's cherry, and I don't think it was stabilized. I think it was just raw cherry, and some of George's wood. So George's wood could be very pretty too. This one here is a zigzag pattern. You can see it's got a little change on the end here. That was an experiment, and it came out halfway decent. Naturally, it's got designs. This is, again, using that little drill to do those designs on the outside, and I think that makes a real, it makes the pattern kind of jump. But I only do 2 at a time. That way, if you do 2, and you don't, your second one is just where it's at. If you try to do a third one, now you got to measure and get it exactly right. But 2, you can't mess up. And the same thing with the lid here. So I talked about this a little bit. This was a, get ready, Martin and I went to the Ornamental Turning Symposium in Seattle last fall. And they asked us if we would like to participate in a box challenge. So they sent us a piece of Mopane that was 3 by 3 by 6 and make a box out of it, any shape you want. Well, I made about 4 or 5 practices, and this is a piece of cherry, and it come out about the way I wanted to it, but I made a mistake, but I'm not going to point it out to you. But this is oval shaped, using an oval rosette, and it's also tapered. The rosette, yes, right. Your rubber, it just goes in an oval pattern, and your cutter is cutting it. But then I have a thing called a curvilinear. You make a profile on it, and it pulls the cutter on an angle. It takes a long time to do it. You're only moving it about 4 or 5 thousandths each rotation, so you don't end up with if you didn't, it would look like a big spiral. And you do the inside and the outside the same way. I even got down and you can't hardly see it probably. There's a little pattern way down in the bottom of it. And that was kind of tricky because now you got your long nose cutter way down in there, and you hope you don't get into the side of it somewhere. And you could very easily. And there's a little basket weave around the edge.
So you started out with just a solid chunk of wood.
Yes.
In a chuck, and then you just set up all that stuff, and you made it oval, made the inside oval, did all the outsides, all on this lathe.
No, I first made it round on my regular lathe, on my jet lathe.
That's oval.
I made it round, a cylinder, and no, it's not. And then I brought it over here and started making the oval and the taper.
Okay.
And it took a long time to do that.
You turned it around to get rid of most of the bulk.
Yes. You know, the round was about this size right here. So all this here had to go away with it when it was cutting it. So you start cutting it, and you're cutting here, and you're not cutting up here, because it just takes a while to get rid of all that wood. It takes a long while. I told you about this one here. It's actually 3. This is actually the cylinders was turned on a metal lathe. As you can see, there's 3 layers of wood there, and they all had to be turned very precisely, so they just slipped inside of each other. So when I glued them, you didn't have any voids here in the sides. Slid inside of each other. This one inside was solid when I first started, and then when I got it glued together, then I turned it out. But the bottom and the top, they were separate. That's the reason I can put a design on the bottom and down inside.
Back to cutting the oval, do you use the same bit or the same cutter on the inside and outside?
Usually, yes. Not always. It depends on, some cut better than others. Now, I have cut like this piece right here. This piece here was cut with that drill frame using a machinist end mill. And that's one of them where you have to line it up perfectly, so if you don't, you could be wider at the bottom than you are at the top, vice versa, depend if he's on an angle. So you got to line up this table very precisely so that your end mill is going straight in there, and it makes a nice even side wall. And there's some little divots inside when I was trying to make the design, and that I didn't like it, but I said, well, that's a design feature I didn't plan on. So this here is a piece of African blackwood. And the little divots that's on the inside, it was done with using the guy made up a pattern, so he knew how far he was going to move in and how far he was going to move out. And you end up with a little crosshair, and you use a laser attached to the table, and you move the table over to hit that crosshair, and then you did your cut. And you backed it out, and you relined it, and that's what we did that with that. And it really quite attractive. Not really not. You have to make the little bowl had to be made to a profile. It had to be exact inside and outside so that when the pattern you was following it was the exact same dimension as what you started with. This one here, this is called a barleycorn. The little circles around here, you use this little tool right here. These little bumps here are used to set your calipers against this here cutter. And you have to figure out, there's a little math involved, you have to figure out how big those little circles are got to be. You say, okay, I measure the diameter of this here, then I come up with the circumference of with a diameter times pi gives you circumference, and you divide that by the number of circles you're going to have. This is excuse me, got 24 little circles on it. So now that says how big your circle is going to be, and then you come back and you set your cutter to cut that size circle. And you do one cut, and then you phase it just like I did there, and you do the second row. And the goal is to where those one circle, the edge of it will just touch. That's the goal. And you don't know that until you start cutting on it. This on top was done with a dome chuck. A dome chuck allows you to offset the piece so that this one right here, say for example, was centered. Then you index it around 60 degrees and you cut another one and another one and another one. But it takes you a little while to set that up. It's quite a contraption that you have on your lathe for holding this little bitty piece, but it works. But it's all, again, you're moving it in thousandths of an inch. You're not moving it an eighth of an inch or 3/16 or nothing like that. And again, that's the basket weave on the side. With this the flower in the bottom and the flower on the inside. And we talked about the threads. And this is myrtle wood. Myrtle wood is not a really hard wood, but it holds pretty good detail, surprisingly. You know, I have not, but I have stabilized this piece that's on the lathe right now. That's a piece of stabilized Bradford pear, and it's really quite nice. It really holds great detail after you stabilize it. The stabilizer, you could take some pretty punky wood and stabilize it and come up with a pretty nice piece. It's almost like taking before you put the threads on, you soak it with super glue, and the super glue acts as a stabilizer, and it helps a lot. It stains your wood, but you know, if you're going to cut threads in, you don't care anyway. You just don't want to slop it everywhere. Cactus juice, yeah. And it's a good system. You can stabilize about anything you want to. You know, but the key is it's got to be dry wood. It can't be wet wood. It's got to be very, very dry. The drier, the better. Any questions?
What's that little piece there on the corner?
This one here? Okay. I went to a workshop down in Louisiana, and this is called the fish patterns. Now, you talk about a lot of steps. There was probably 25 steps in that. And you had to make about 3 adjustments between each cut. It was very, very time consuming. Me and another guy, with the third guy, calling out the change, the adjustments. We'd cut it, and then okay, what we got to adjust this, and you do that. Same thing with this right here. This is called a shell pattern. This is done, as you can tell, it's offset because you end up with the center clear down here. And you start off, and this one here only took 2 adjustments. I made one where you did 3, and it made it move off to the side a little bit, had a little bend to it. But this is just a piece of African blackwood, and this is just right off of the cutter. There's no finish or polisher or anything done to this. It's just the blackwood does that. I guess it's got a little bit of oil in it, and it just shines when you cut it. Of course, your cutter is running very, very fast. This here is just another piece of veneers. I made a mistake when I made this here. I used the African blackwood for my finial, and it weighs a ton. I should have made it a much lighter, or not. It's just not a good choice. But it's only one I've got left. The rest of them I'll give away or something. But it was an easy. It was fun to do. I mean, it was. I think I held it with double stickum tape, I believe, to hold it in place while I turned it. And it was just with veneers you can do all kinds of things. You see that right there? There you cut clear down into the base. This base is a piece of koa wood, koa wood is a nice turning wood. Years ago, there was a guy in our club. He was from Canada, and lived in Hawaii for a while and taught how to make ukuleles. Well, he got back to the States and he decided he didn't want to make ukuleles anymore, and he wanted to sell this lathe. So I went over and bought the lathe. And he said, well, you want some wood to go with it? And I said, well, sure. I filled my pickup full of stuff. He had all this koa wood that he had resawed it into real thin strips, and I still got a bunch of it, and it just all kinds of wood. I got the lathe, and I sold the lathe for what I paid for it, and I kept all the wood. It's really been great to have a source like that, because not many folks got koa wood. Because koa wood, if you get koa wood that's grown on the island of Oahu, it's about $50 a board foot. If you get it in the outer islands, it's maybe $40 a board foot. But this is nice stuff. Any questions? And I'd be glad to have somebody come over to the shop if they want to see the bigger machine. A couple of folks have seen it on our open shops, but I'm willing to share it at any time, except the next 2 months. You're probably right. But MDF hasn't been around all that long. But MDF is one of the few materials we got today. If you want a piece that's 3/4 of an inch thick, it's 3/4 of an inch thick. You go buy a sheet of plywood and ain't no telling what it's going to be. It can be the same, different thickness in the same sheet of plywood. It's very crappy stuff. Well, if that's all I've got, folks.